We are on the corner of Stockton and Sacramento Street, and just above us up on the hill is the Mission Home. This corner is actually where Dolly Cameron and her interpreter would meet with the Chinatown squad.
And as soon as Dolly Cameron and her interpreter met with the Chinatown squad, they would go down this hill into Chinatown to respond to the calls of the women and girls in need of their help.
We are at the Cameron House on 920 Sacramento Street. We are so excited to be here because there's so many amazing stories and amazing women that lived and worked here. So Dolly Cameron arrived in 1895. It was the month of April, and she had agreed to teach sewing classes for 1 year. And of course she met Miss Culbertson, who was the director at the time. And Miss Culbertson was a little bit unsure of Dolly, and she said, well, you know, we've had a dynamite threat this week, and it wasn't just any dynamite threat. It was enough to blow up the entire like city block. It was a lot of dynamite. But Dolly was determined, and she agreed to continue on. And then soon after that, Miss Culbertson also asked her to go with her in the middle of the night into Chinatown, where a girl had asked for them to come and help her out. And so Dolly really, in her first week of living here, learned a lot. And interestingly enough, is she became the director a few years later, and she also decided to keep working, and she stayed here her entire career. And after she retired, they renamed what was called the Occidental Mission Home for Girls to Cameron House. So now it's called Cameron House, and it still acts as a community center for Chinatown and the Chinese Americans that live in the area.
And this is also the exact location where Tien Fu Wu was brought here. And the moment she arrived, she immediately showed her personality of how she really wanted to be in control of her life. And even though she was really young at the time, about 8 or 9 years old, she knew what she wanted and she went after it. And one interesting fact about Tien Fu was that one night, she and a roommate decided to go down to the kitchen to cook a meal in the middle of the night. And they had so much fun in the kitchen. They were laughing and they were making all the noises and woke up Dolly Cameron. And Dolly wasn't happy. She went down to the kitchen and found Tien Fu and her roommate in there, and she ordered them to go back to their bedroom immediately. Well, Tien Fu obviously was very angry about this. So she stomped. I imagine she stomped up to her bedroom, opened the bedroom window, and took off her clothes and stood in front of the open window to try to catch nightly cold wind so that she could catch a cold and catch pneumonia and die. And then her spirit, her ghost, will come back to the mission home to haunt Dolly Cameron. And that's just, I just love the story because it really shows the kind of girl she was, you know.
We are in Spofford Alley. In chapter 10 of the story, Dolly is asked to help Miss Culbertson go find a girl that has asked to come back to the mission home. And so they come and they meet the Chinatown squad, and they come to this exact alley. The Chinatown squad pounds on the door announcing their presence, but no one answers it after a while. And so they end up breaking into one of the windows that are now bricked in, and that is where they find a girl that has asked for help. And a lot of times the girl would send a message either through someone who could write a note, or they send a piece of torn cloth so that Dolly Cameron and Ah Cheng and the other interpreters would know how to find the girl that was sending for them.
A lot of times after Dolly Cameron finished her rescue missions and returned to mission home, she will find Tien Fu Wu sitting at the top of the stairs waiting for her. And Tien Fu was young at the time, but she had an understanding of the work that Dolly did, and she understood it was important, it was life-saving. And so through time, Tien Fu would participate in a way to help with the rescue mission by preparing meals or helping to prepare a room for the girls who have been brought to the mission home. Eventually, Tien Fu will grow up to be a part of the rescue missions to help girls who needed help.
We are at the Donaldina Cameron Alley, and this was named after her in honor of all of her rescues that she did in the alleys on both sides of us. So in 2013, the city of San Francisco renamed several alleys throughout Chinatown in honor of people that had served the people.
Exactly, and it's so exciting to be standing here at the very spot where Donaldina Cameron and the Chinatown Squad and perhaps Tien Fu Wu were here doing important work to help Chinese girls and women who needed their help.
We are standing on Jackson Street, and during the early 1900s, the bubonic plague swept through San Francisco, and the government quarantined Chinatown, which meant they put up barriers and they stationed police officers at corners. They wouldn't let anyone in or out of Chinatown, and so this obviously created a problem when Dolly Cameron or the women at the mission home wanted to come in and help the Chinese girls that needed help.
Exactly, and one instance was that Dolly Cameron, she helped two sisters, two Chinese girls, when they asked for help, and one of the sisters was really, really sick. After Dolly Cameron took both of the sisters to the mission home, she realized that she had to call for medical help for one of the sisters, so she called a doctor on Jackson Street, which is where we are standing right now, and sent an ambulance to take the sister to the clinic right here to receive medical help.
We are at the original site of Bartlett Alley, and this is a location where Dolly Cameron and Ah Chen came to answer a call that a girl had sent out. She had been very badly abused and she needed help and she wanted to escape. And so they took her back to the mission home.
When Tien Fu saw this girl who was being brought into the mission home that day, she was very angry. She was angry because this girl was so badly abused. I imagine the reason why she was so angry was because perhaps it reminded her of her own mistreatment. After she was sold in China and brought to San Francisco, all these adults who had traded her for money over and over again had never been nice to her. They mistreated her as well, and perhaps seeing this girl being brought to the mission home that day from this very location, Tien Fu thought that this is not right. This cannot happen to any human beings. So I imagine that was the moment when she, in her mind, she decided that I'm going to do something about this. When I grow up, when I have the ability to do anything, I am going to do something to change it.
We are on Commercial Street in Chinatown, and this entire area was quarantined and barricaded during the bubonic plague in the early 1900s. In fact, there was a little girl named Luin Kum, and her sister was sick, and she didn't know how to help her because no one would come in to help if someone had the plague. So she went to the mission home for help.
Yes, and she had to sneak out of Chinatown to get to the mission home to get help from Dolly Cameron, and then Dolly Cameron had to sneak in to this area, this specific spot where we are right now, and help take her sister back to the mission home and then call a doctor for medical assistance.
We are at Pier 40 in San Francisco, and this is the original location of what was called the detention shed. In fact, I have a quote here I want to read. It says that throughout the late 1880s and early 1900s, Chinese ship passengers arrived in San Francisco were detained in a two-story shed at the Pacific Mail Steamship Company wharf. So this is what this area was called, and the Chinese were sent into the shed to await their paperwork and processing, and sometimes there were up to 400 to 500 Chinese immigrants in this shed. So the conditions were not great at all. In fact, in 1900, Reverend Iron Condit, who is a missionary working among the Chinese in California, complained, and basically from that complaint they decided to then build the immigration station at Angel Island. But that took several years to build. So this was definitely a place that Tien Fu saw first when she arrived in San Francisco.
And what's really fascinating to think about is that the same sky we're looking at today and the same ocean, the water we're looking at today, they were the same sky and the same water that people 100 years ago were looking at. And so what I'm trying to say is that some things remain the same through time, but not for Tien Fu. For example, when she first got here, on the boat, her name was Tai Choi being changed into Tien Fu. She was forced to take on a new name and forced to start a new life here in this new land. And this is where her story unfurled and she became the person she was, a very, very feisty, determined, intelligent, and just wonderful woman, a force for good. And it started here, right at this spot.